All live. We're all here. We're all good.
Good.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay.
Hi, Jack. Hi, Simon. Hi, Lee.
We are here. So we have our usual suspects of George and Simon. And then today's guest is Lee Eldridge from the Athlete Tribe. I've personally worked with Lee before when I was in Switzerland, but I won't take over his background. So if I hand over to you, Lee, just explain basically how you've ended up where you are founding the Athlete Tribe in a brief little summary for us.
So I suppose really my coaching journey started, normally when I was around, 17, 18, and just coaching sports and being super interested in just performance. And then that's led on to sports science degrees. And then I realized that basically if you want to work in elite performance, the next step is obviously a master's. And pretty much I was completing my master's and was offered a role at a rugby club, a professional rugby club. And there pretty much I started my professional strength and conditioning career. Previously before that, I'd done a few internships and the normal kind of progression to get into it. And then I'd spent 6 years at that one club, but with a variety of different head coaches and, players. There's huge turnovers in professional sports for players. So it's a great opportunity to, learn coaching and also, develop ideas and different ways of coaching individuals, but in a team setting.
Yes.
And then obviously I kind of finished there and I moved to Switzerland to work for a performance company called Hinsa Performance. And their main athletic population is that of motorsports, and they're heavily into Formula One. And my role was to basically work with some junior drivers based in Switzerland, and that didn't really happen. So I got pushed more into the corporate side of the business, where basically I started to work with CEOs, chief financial officers, lots of C-suite guys and females. And it was kind of, the model as well. Their saying is better life, better performance. And it was more of a holistic model. And that kind of led me through that 3-year journey. And then I was basically approached to go back and be head of the academy for the ice hockey team in Geneva. And I finished there this March just gone. And basically just wanted to put more time into the Athlete Tribe. So I've started that journey now, and it was going to be a remote company, and obviously with lockdown everybody's become a remote company. So there's
the niche is gone.
There's lots of competition out there, but then I suppose there's lots of people that need help remotely, and that really sums it up from my point of view, really. And that's it.
Going on that, there's it's a market that's probably saturated but not of quality. You find a lot of the time there's not tons and tons of quality out there. Like even with personal training and all that, there's the thousands and thousands of trainers being qualified every year, but it doesn't mean that there's a lot of good out there. So if you've got your bearings right, it sounds like it will work anyway, no matter what.
Do you think they get found out a lot later on online? Do you know what I mean? Because a poor coach will get found out pretty quickly these days, I think, whereas a poor coach online might take a bit longer. I don't know the answer. It's just
I think that from my point of view, we obviously, all of us have to kind of be on social media and putting out content, and you can see that there's a huge opportunity for people to work with highly experienced coaches that have got a lot of time on their hands at the moment, that would normally be in the trenches working with athletes or, different varying levels of sporting population. So that's a huge benefit. From my point of view, it allows people not to really have any kind of, how would you say, anyone can put down that they're a strength and conditioning coach on their Instagram profile.
Yeah.
And, like anybody can put down, a personal trainer. And there are varying levels of strength and conditioning coaches, even in a strength and conditioning coach. There are what we class, our junior strength and conditioning coaches, our more senior guys, and they just go through the ranks. And unfortunately, Instagram, you cannot discriminate between who's a good coach and who's not a good coach. And normally, unfortunately, on Instagram, the following comes from people demonstrating their own athletic potential or their own athletic performance, which is great, and tops off, great, all fair play to them.
But it doesn't solve the problem, does it?
No, and it's not what you can do to yourself, it's what you can impart to the other people. And that's what coaching is. It's imparting knowledge. As a coach, and it's one of the biggest things I've learned more working with general population, is that you're a salesman. We're selling people these ideas that are going to improve their performance, and that's it from a nutshell, basically.
Do you have any general population guys on with the athlete tribe, or is it mainly still athlete?
I would say probably at the moment it's an 80-20 split. 80% is general population, and out of that 80%, I'd say most of them are rugby guys, because I've had that rugby background, and also, while I was spending time at a professional rugby club as a junior strength and conditioning coach, I went out and worked in a lower level club as a head strengthening coach to develop my management skills of physios and coaches, but also being the lead guy, and the responsibility that comes with that. And that's where we're at the moment, is that, and that's how it goes. And it is truly a frustrating role, because people don't want to invest, in coaching. They don't want to spend. There are some people out there that want to invest, but a lot of guys, when you say, look, this is how much it costs, and they're like, can I afford that?
Yeah.
But when we come out of lockdown, a lot of people will think nothing to, being in London and going out on a Saturday night after a game and spending £150 with the lads. Whereas, don't do that once a month, and that pretty much can cover every aspect of your coaching, from supplementation, from coaching, from gym memberships, etc. Even some soft tissue therapy.
Tell me this, Lee. Do you find that, because we worked in a place where they were trying to touch on athletes before, but athletes never want to pay, and only in terms of the ones that we were, because they normally run off sponsorship, they normally run off handouts, and people using them as a name, if you like, they upsell their product. Then it's like, we've got this person here, so it ends up being that there's not a lot of money involved with athletes versus general pop, if you like.
Yes, I think that the athletes that normally want to invest are more endurance-based athletes.
Yeah.
And whether that's a culture, definitely in terms of the higher level, I'd say, business people that I work with, majority of them are into their endurance sports. So they'll quite happily spend a fortune on a piece on their bike that can make them go faster. So they can see the benefit of investing in a coach. But then I spent my early time at a tennis performance center, and as soon as you start to become noticed in the LTA, then it kind of gets to that point where not that people question investment, but I can see your point that I'm X rank this player, why don't you work with me for free, or can you give it to me a bit cheaper so that I can promote you? And you have to kind of play that. You have to play it from a business point of view. Are you going to get your return on investment? But you also have to get it so that person is still invested in you, and that's a big thing. If people don't pay, not to ramble on, but at the moment everybody's offering free programs, and lots of people are just going out and just doing 2 weeks of this, 2 weeks of this, 2 weeks of that. So they're not actually developing any consistency. Realistically, however good a coach you are, you can't make much of a change in 2 weeks or 4 weeks. You need to be working with that coach. And that's the same with a professional. So in rugby, for example, a guy would turn up first day of pre-season, new to the club, it's summer, huge motivation to train. He's a great guy, he works super hard. let's see when it's kind of January and it's pissing down with rain and it's freezing cold and we've lost a couple of games. Let's see how well that guy is and how motivated that guy is. And that's the same with people, you know.
Yeah.
Pick up a program, super motivated, I go, and then drops off. What do? Go find a new program.
Yeah.
So with the athlete tribe, the phrase or the saying you have is everyone can train like an athlete, or everyone's an athlete. So expand on that a bit more. So what does that mean by that? With people most being general population guys, does that mean the way they train or the philosophy you use? What does that, expand on that? What does that mean?
So I think there's a huge difference between working out and training. And I think that's, you know, some people say, oh, I'm just working out. But for me, you know, you need to be training. And what I mean by that is you have a plan, you know. So let's start off with, you know, your goal, you know where you're going to move to, what it's going to be, you know, and that can be a sporting goal, or that could be a general goal. Then from there, you can get a plan, right? So what does Jack's plan look like? You know, how often can he get into the gym? How much time can he spend in the gym? And then we can build on top of that, right? Well, okay, it's 4 sessions a week. It's lasts this amount of time, but we can build on that. Next step is that then, you know, we start to develop, I would say, you know, not athletic movements, but just develop good functional movement and build from there, basically. You know, as we always we spoke about in terms of, you know, squat, hinge, single leg, push, pull, all the basic foundational movements that go together to create better performance. Mm-hmm. Then there's a kind of more of an aspect, and I think a huge aspect that people don't really look at is, I don't think we really monitor our training. You know, one of the big things for me is that over the course of, you know, my training, I've always been in gyms, you know, although that I've been on site and fortunate to be able to train in elite gyms or elite performance environments. I've always tried to have a gym membership, because sometimes you don't want to train at work, or you want to go out and visit a different environment. And majority of people, you know, don't track their loads, don't have a session to go off of, don't really kind of monitor how they're feeling and auto-regulate, adapt their training to what they're doing. So the way that...
Do you mean within, sorry, Lee, do you mean within session when you say auto-regulate, or just, or week by week? So do you mean that if someone is, you know, feeling a little weaker, not quite as strong, not quite as energetic, do you mean that within the session they would then perhaps change what they're doing there and then, or amend it, I should say?
Yeah, so with auto-regulation, you know, from an athletic population, you know, you turn up on a Monday morning, you know, we'd go through all your data points, your internal and external monitoring, and we'd say, right, well, this is the program that we were going to give you, but hey, you know, how do you feel in yourself? We can adjust it. And also that would be very driven by, for example, how many minutes you played on the weekend. So, but obviously, you know, not everybody is an elite professional athlete, but they might still have played their sport on the weekends. They might still be a bit beaten up. So what you want to try to do is change that session so that it doesn't put you into a deeper hole, and allows it so that, you know, that you can get more out of the week going forward. And that's the biggest probably area if you think about it. And obviously we spoke about CrossFit and what's happening there, but my personal thoughts about CrossFit is that it's a great culture. It gets people up and training. You know, it drives this. You know, if you don't have a sport and you're not really driven by being in a team sport environment, you know, CrossFit is great. The problem you've got is that most people, they go in and they see that session and they think, right, I've got to do that session. But from the general population is, you don't know how that person's coming in, you know, how stressed they are, how much sleep they had, you know, what's their nutrition been? When was the last time they had a decent intake of nutrition? And the problem is then all you're doing is you're putting more stress on more stress. So you can auto-regulate that way, or you can say, right, you know, I'm 3 sets in, you know, the bar speed's a great indicator of how well you are from your central nervous system. And you just look at it and you say, right, you know, I looked at my procession and I don't think that this is what I'm going to be able to hit. Well, I'll just adjust it basically. And that's where we're trying to and that's where I try and educate kind of our members that, you know, it's progression, it's not perfection. You know, just because I write you a session doesn't mean that you necessarily need to complete that session if you're not feeling, you know, there. And
so what with the monitoring? So say client X what are some simple things someone can do other than I feel a bit shitty? What can they do to work out if they should adapt their session or not? Because sometimes you go in, you just need a little bit of warming up. Before you train, you can feel a little bit like slow, like a bit sluggish. But then once you've done the warm up, you're like, actually, no, I'm pretty good. So what are some things that anything useful techniques that people can do, or something just simple that everyone could do just to use their own auto-regulation and monitoring? So
I think it obviously starts a lot before what happens. And, you know, sleep is a great indicator of recovery, and it is also a great tool to recovery. So if you're not sleeping well, it's a sign that, hey, you might not be recovering as well as you should be. You know, so resting heart rate's a great one to take in the morning and to track that. You know, we can all get access now to wearables where we could get heart rate variability, you know, and go a little bit deeper into our sleep.
So heart rate variability, just for some people that might not know.
So heart rate variability. So for example, if you looked at your heart rate watch and it said 60 beats a minute, it doesn't mean that it is a beat every second. There are slight variations in each beat. And the more variation that we have, it points to the fact that you are more recovered. And the reason why is because we have two nervous systems, what we call our rest and digest and our fight and flight. And it means that our rest and digest is working, or kind of is shutting down the fight and flight, our parasympathetic versus our sympathetic. And that's a real big indicator. Now, I really like heart rate variability because it's also a tool for monitoring the amount of stress that you are putting on yourself during your working day. And we would also look at it that, for example, when I worked in the lower levels of rugby, I had people who were builders. I had people that were top flight bankers. I had, you know, people that were doctors, the whole range of a variation of people. So the builders would rock up and they're physically in the shit basically. And then you'd have like guys that were, you know, CEOs and all those type of people that were just completely mentally just gone from the day. So heart rate variability is a great way to look at individuals and get a collective monitoring and collective kind of overall of how everyone is. That's one way. Now, if you have access to some bar velocity measuring, you know, like a push band, and they're getting cheaper and cheaper. And this is kind of people that are trying to really optimize their performance. You know, you could look at bar speed and average bar speeds and counter movement jumps. Jumps obviously is a great way to look at things. So there are a couple of ways, but really, if you're pretty adept at training, and you've got a good training age, i.e. 2-3 years plus of 3 or 4 sessions per week, a structured program, you can really start to feel it, I think, after about 3 or 4 warm-up sets of getting into it, that, hey, look, it doesn't feel right today, or the bar speed's not going well, and then other days you're like, it feels really light today. And they're the days where you look at your session, you think, I can do more today. And they're the days that you could push a little bit harder.
Maximize it.
Do you know what though? Like even from a general pop position there, going on the self-regulation or auto-regulation, that's so important, because we've seen it working in different various gyms. People coming in, trashing themselves day in, day out, not sleeping. You know, they're all like, they've got their own families or whatever. They're stressed to their minds, and they think, oh no, but I went hard last week, so I have to do the same this week. And sometimes it's just like, I would do it, and I'm sure Jack and all that, without, because I don't do the heart rate variability, but there's days you go in and just the bar feels heavy, and you're like, is there a point in going through this session and trying to just kill myself on it and not really achieve what I'm trying to achieve? Or should I just adjust from here on and then start back next week, you know? And I think especially normal people, should be going through that same phase. Sometimes, you know, there's days you just don't feel like it, and for us, I'd say it puts them at a higher risk of injury, or like you said, it digs that hole even deeper, so they're not getting the recovery that they need, which means progression is just not happening, and it's just self-defeating then from that point on.
You can kind of use the program as a semi-stencil, as it were.
Yeah,
you know, it's there to help you progress, but you know, there's a flexibility.
we would I'm sure that you would do it as well, George. Like, you know, you like I don't know. Do you do personal training yourself, do you, Lee, or not? Do you, or is it more of a management and running now?
Yeah. So if you like, obviously from a strength and conditioning point of view, there would be individual sessions where it'd be, you know, end of rehab stuff. So, you know, and that's a great time for me. Is I know it's a negative for the athlete, but you get to know the athlete really well, you know, and I'm sure you know your some of your clients really well. The guys that you see 3, 4, maybe even 5 times a week, and you spend time with them, and what you find is that you know, it's very hard to talk about the sport all the time, you know. Very hard for you to talk about training to your client all the time. So what happens is that you talk more about other things, basically, and you build a working relationship. And that is where the key to coaching is, that then you can hear. So for us, we would do all the monitoring things, and, you know, how well you feel, all the subjective stuff. We'd have a look at your jumps, etc., etc. But the biggest way that I can tell if an athlete's really up for it is in the warm-up. You know, I can see as soon as we start the warm-up, you know, who are the guys who are switched on, which ones are still mucking around, which guys are stretching, spending a little bit longer to get warmed up, basically. And then you can go over and you speak to them and say, hey, how are you feeling? And 9 times out of 10, most of them are pretty honest with you once you've built up that relationship. And that's it, basically.
Can we go just sorry, real quick? Can we go a little bit back to the bar speed again? And you mentioned the central nervous system, and I think for the benefit of the people that are watching, just a brief, really brief description on the central nervous system and why it's so important when it comes to strength. So if you wouldn't mind just telling the guys that, please, Lee.
Yeah. So if you think about it, really, we have. So in terms of our coordination, so we have intra and intermuscular coordination. So the central nervous system fires off muscles. So obviously, if we think about it, our intra nervous system is firing a group or a muscle group. So quads, for example, whereas intramuscle coordination is that we'd fire our quads, but we'd also relax our hamstrings. So if we're in a fatigue state, we're probably not going to recruit as much muscle fibers or recruit the muscle fibers in an optimal way. So bar velocity is a great tool that you can use, or jumps, for example, because we can get so much data in terms of jump heights, bar speed, etc. And we know that if you're a certain weight is normally at this speed in meters per second. Okay, so, you know, say for example, it's reasonably light, so it might be moving at like 1.5 meters per second, but then the same weight the next week is moving significantly slower. Well, then that's a sign that, hey, look, your neural system or your fatigue is still in the body from whatever you've been doing. So, hey, look, we're going to have to maybe adjust that session. And the problem that we have is that if most programs are designed on percentages, so normally a percentage of a 1 RM, and the problem is that we know that percentage has a huge variation from week to week. So by using bar speed, we can adjust to make sure that George is pushing himself as hard as possible, or Simon or Jack or whatever. And, you know, that's one thing that we can do. And if you haven't got that tool, like Simon says, you know, when you get the bar on your back, or, you know, you're benching or whatever you're doing, and it feels a bit slow today, that's an indication to maybe step back. And it comes back down to this idea that when we talk, like, periodization is a huge term. And, you know, I think that we've all probably spent so many lectures and so many books reading about periodization. And it's great. It's a plan. It's as you said, it's a stencil. It's a little bit of structure around a huge kind of human system that can just get thrown out the window. You know, I used to do it at rugby all the time. You know, you stand there and you block, and right, we're going to do linear, we're going to do this, we're going to do block, and then the guy goes and gets injured. So, you know, you have to then change everything again. So it's not a set in stone.
Fixed.
Yeah, it's not set in stone, you know. And then the flip side of it is that it needs to have some structure to it, because
you can't just do anything.
You're just doing it.
You can't have an unplanned session. It's almost like you've planned something.
Yeah, and
whereas on your bad day we'll do this, on a good day we'll do that.
You know, and there's no disrespect, like, you know, I have to be careful when I'm in gyms because I'm always watching people, what they're doing. I'm always watching personal trainers, and like a lot of people are like, why are you looking at me? What's And then the problem is, then you kind of explain, oh, well, you know, I do a bit of coaching, or I've done a bit of coaching. Then they think that it's like I'm assessing them or whatever.
Yeah.
But actually, it's really just interesting as a, you know, like I love traveling because it's great just to sit in an airport and just watch people and what they do, how people act. And then, you know, once you get in a gym, you can see a guy working or a girl working with a client, and you scratch your head and you're like, well, last week you were doing this, and this week you're doing that, and then the next. And it's like picking up a free program, basically. And, you know, it's sometimes tough to watch.
It's very hard to watch. And then they come back thinking, do you know, I've just been going to the gym all year and I've seen no progress. I'm still squatting 40 kilo. And it's like, because you've only squatted 40 kilo 4 times this year. And the rest of it, you've been jumping around the gym doing random programs in between.
What's worse potentially is that you could be getting progress, but you have no idea you're getting progress.
Yeah.
No idea. And then, you know, once the motivation dips, you know, that person's gone, unfortunately.
Sorry to jump in there, Jack. Just tell me this. I was just going to ask you if when you say that, so let's say somebody's coming in, the bar speed's low, you know that they're not fully recovered, and then you're reducing the session because it's not the best for them. Are you reducing the volume of the session but keeping most of the exercises the same? Are you changing the session completely? They match it up, because obviously you're still trying to get progress out of them. I'm just wondering if you're doing a volume decrease or an intensity decrease, or you're switching up the program altogether.
So it's a good question. And it depends on the athlete. Normally I would suggest that probably, and it also depends on, from an athlete point of view, what part of the season you're in, you know. So if it's pre-season, ideally we'd want to keep the volume in, just because we want to accumulate volume during that stage, you know.
Yeah.
If it's in season, then it's probably more we're going to look at maybe kind of reducing the volume down, maybe keeping the intensity. But again, with a bar velocity tool, is that we can look at it that, you know, and when we talk about intensity, it might not necessarily mean load on the bar. Sorry, yeah, it might just be that, hey, look, we're just going to shift a little bit in terms from an intensity point of view. In terms of changing the whole session, well, hey, look, rugby is a contact sport 9 times out of 10. Well, it's very rare that we might have maybe 3 or 4 consistent weeks of you being able to train the same exercise because of the nature of the beast. Like, you know, I've taken some contact this weekend. My shoulder doesn't feel great. Right. Well, okay, we're not going to bench press you then. We're going to do something else. And that's another point that from a general population is that if you do feel something's wrong, don't do that exercise.
Yeah.
And, you know, like by all means, and from an athletic point of view, to try and convince somebody that, hey, look, you're not going to bench press this week. It's a tough one. You know, it's a tough sell where you're basically saying, look, let's not just keep aggravating the shoulder. Let's kind of really slow down, you know, like, oh, my back feels a bit dodgy. Okay, well, do we need to squat today? And don't forget that, especially with how we work it, is that there's a continuum of exercises. You know, for a lower body, or lower body is easier to do, but for a lower body, you know, okay, so we know the back squat is the gold standard that we all, you know, everybody's go to. Well, yeah, okay, I can't back squat today. Well, can you box squat? Can you front box squat? And you work your way down, you know, till it might be, for example, a prowler push or a dumbbell step up.
Yeah.
And to a certain degree, I don't really care what you do as long as you get some lower body stimulus into you. And that's what people don't understand, is that as long as we do something, it's better than pushing ourselves so hard that we put ourselves into a pit and we can't do nothing for the next 3 days. And that's where lockdown is going to be really interesting for some people that go back to the gym, because what will happen is people will go in the gym and they'll be like, right, here we go. I haven't been able to squat or bench, and they'll just, they won't be able to walk for the next 3 or 4 days. And, their shoulders are in pieces, their chest will be sore as anything. And you're like, right, okay, let's just play it smart, basically.
So going off that, what would be your tips for people going into the gym, returning to play? What advice would you give people for that? Because especially with gen populations, like a lot of people, like clients as well, they do classes alongside their PT as well. And I can't control what the class instructor is going to put up. Like, I imagine there's probably not much thought into it. So what advice would you give from a point of view of looking at someone, okay, you're going to go back into your PT and go back into your classes? What advice would you give them?
So I think we need to split it up. Let's split it up into gym and sport, because they're two very different animals from a loading point of view. But it's all tied under one thing. One thing is that everybody, the Jocko Wilkes is like, it's extreme ownership, that you need to take ownership and monitor what you're doing or what you've done. So if you imagine, it's tough in terms from a gym instructor class point of view, as well as a rugby coach or football coach, because I don't know what Jack's done compared to what Simon's done. All I can go on is how much you're telling me and whether you're telling me the truth. And most people lie to their coaches through their teeth. Yeah, I've been doing loads, this and this. And then in your head, you're formulating a plan, right? We're going to do this, and then right, hamstring tweak, calf tweak, etc. So the overall situation is that I would strongly suggest is that most people look at their load. So the simplest way to do that is, looking at session RPE, where you basically look at how many sessions you've done through the week, the duration, times it by an RPE of out of 10, 10 being like you were dead at the end of it, and 1 being like, hey, this is, like I'm asleep basically. And that will give you what we call an acute load. So basically over the course of 7 days, that's your load. And then in theory, hey, look, everyone's been in lockdown for so long now, you should be able to build up your chronic load, which is your 28-day load. And you look at your acute versus your chronic. And we get a little bit of a ratio there, basically. And people be like, wow, that's so much hard work. It is hard work to a degree. It takes about, 2 minutes at the end of every session. Probably takes 2 minutes on a Sunday evening to do the maths. Pretty easy on an Excel. But the chances are that the last thing you want to do is come out of lockdown and get injured and then not be able to train while everyone else is
blasting.
Just that's it's pointless.
Yeah.
So you can use that on both in terms of sports and gym. In terms of gym, is that you nobody's had access to load. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
So a lot of people's misconception is that they'll be able to go back in and start cleaning, squatting, benching, what they were doing at the end before they went into lockdown. So you probably want 2, maybe even 3 weeks, depending on how much you've done in lockdown, as feelers. Just get back in the gym, just get moving. You're not trying to kill yourself. You again, bar speed, it looks good. You're leaving a few reps in the tank, and then you can start to kind of record your loads, and each week just bump it up, basically. Now, from a sporting point of view, it's exactly the same. We need to expose you to some high speed running. Well, have you been doing any high speed running in lockdown? Because in theory, we can all be, everyone's either turned into a bodyweight guru or a runner over lockdown. And again, let's just start to expose you to, some tempo. If you haven't done any tempo running, right, well, let's get some 50-meter tempos in you, 75s, 100s. Let's get some change of direction work. And again, just slowly build up. And I think the huge part that most people, both personal trainers, both coaches, and on the shoulders of the athlete, is to make sure they turn around and say, I think I've done enough today. I feel in a great spot. Walk away from that session feeling like you probably could have done a little bit more, but you've still worked, and the next day we'll come back, or the next session will come back and we'll push it a little bit more. They're the things I would say. Would you, with the leaving a little bit in the tank when you're training, would you recommend doing that anyway, even as people develop and everything like that, and their fitness kind of returns, let's say 6 months after lockdown? Would you still be looking to, on the whole, want people just to keep a little bit left over at the end of a session? Or does it vary? I've seen people get really strong lifting submaximally. And what I mean by submaximally is, not going for 1RMs every single session. I've seen guys, doing, threes at, say, like 90%, 92%. So they're submaximal lifts, but you're just repeating. So you can get really strong by not doing what we call maximal strength work. And what I mean by maximal strength work, or absolute maximum strength work, is you are under the bar and it is a 1RM effort. Mm. And one thing that we would do with athletes is that I've never personally done 1RM testing, and people be like, that's a bit, weird. But from a pressure environment, if you injure somebody doing a 1RM, it's your head that's on the block. Yeah. And, availability to play, if you're a football player, and you're being paid £300,000 per week, you're being paid £300,000 per week to play on a Saturday, not to complete a 1RM test in the week. And so people can get really strong. It's like running. You can get really fit by maybe 2 sessions per week. You don't need to go out and run every day and kill yourself and just put yourself into a hole and grind you. So I do like the idea of leaving a little bit in the tank, but then there are certain sessions that need to be putting yourself under, those forms of game situations and game pressures. And that only comes from really kind of trying to push yourself as hard as possible.
With the...
Sorry, Jack.
No, you go, George. Just put in more. I was going to move on. You carry on.
No, so I was just going to say, with those sessions that you're talking about, those specific sessions, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, would you base those sessions on how the individual's feeling, or would they be kind of semi-programmed in, or a bit of both?
Yes, it's got to be a bit of both. I've got to keep to, I've got to make sure that I've got a plan in my head, or I've got a plan structured so that I know from a coach's point of view, there's progressions, so like last week we did this week we're going to do this, and we're building towards next week. So, one way we do it is we keep a strength tracker so that we know that your strength is increasing or it's decreasing, and then there can be bigger formulations around that. Okay. And then, that's one thing that you need to do, basically, and everyone should do it, because, and that's the problem you have, is that as a coach or a trainer, you've probably spent a bit of time writing this session, and you're like, this is a great session, and this person is going to get so much benefit out of it if they complete it. And the question is, if they complete it. The last thing as a trainer is you want somebody to get injured under you. It from a reputation point of view, it doesn't do a reputation any good. And as a coach, it's exactly the same, and exposing people to high intensity running is always probably one of the worst sessions that you can do. And if it's just like heading, you're nervous, you personally are nervous about it. And that's the same with testing as well. You just don't want anybody to get injured under testing.
And it's that risk versus reward, isn't it there? If you're like working on a 3RM and you're like, well, your 3RM's getting better. You've moved that up 5 kilos because we're pushing on. And really, do you need to go on the 1 rep max? And really, because if you're ever going to injure somebody, you're going to injure somebody in an absolute 1 rep max. And that's even for us, for trainers, because the temptation, they test somebody's strength, they show a client how well they progress and all that is always there. And some people think they want strength, but they really don't want strength. People aren't coming to PTs for strength. They're coming in for aesthetics dominantly, and then probably improving the quality of life, so movement and so on. But they put somebody in there just for an ego boost, or for they solidify to them that they're doing much better. And actually, it's not. There's no point. There's absolutely no point.
I like your point about the completing of a program. I found something while we're in lockdown just reminded me of with that point, Lee, is how often like you said, there's injuries that stop people completing the program. For ourselves as trainers, what we get is obviously people's working lives can get in the way. You know, someone might. The nanny might be ill, so they have to have their kids. And so quite often the 3 to 4 week program, 5 week program that we run for them, you get 2 weeks and a week off, and then maybe another week and then a week off. I've found in lockdown, because everyone has attended pretty much every one of their sessions, I've had a really low cancellation rate over the 10 weeks. You know, I'd argue that from a strength and stability perspective, certainly I've seen maybe better results in this 10 weeks than I have outside on like an average perspective. Obviously there's some people that have done not quite as well, and there's some people that have done even better for various reasons. Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think that's a point that we're constantly making over these podcasts, aren't we? Is we can get consistency out of people, then that's going to be, you know, where they're going to start to develop. I just really quickly, guys, because I had a text from Katie last week about the chin-ups. She's just tuned in here. And remember I said she did between 3 and 4 chin-ups. She actually did 5 chin-ups. And she texted me telling me that I needed to correct that. So Katie, I do apologize. It was 5 chin-ups, everyone, that Katie did. Really well done on that. That was awesome. Sorry, carry on, guys.
Lee, you mentioned there with people's conditioning, especially during, like you said, during the lockdown, with people not having access to gym, they turned to running and conditioning and HIIT sessions or whatever they've been doing. I know you do a lot of work on conditioning. You've been putting a lot of stuff out on there. So what, for you, are some misconceptions that people have when people are looking to improve their conditioning, their cardio, as people like is commonly known?
So the first thing is you need to know what type of conditioning you want to improve. So is it a 5K, is it a 10K, or is it for sports? So is it an intermittent, you know, high intensity activity? And then once you've got that goal, like with always, you know, it's good to assess. So, right, let's go and see if we can do a time trial, or a 10K time trial, or, you know, an England RFU test, or a Bronco test, or an intermittent shuttle test. And then really what it's sort of thinking about is that actually most of the times you don't need to do that distance to improve that distance. Again, you know, so it's like improving your strength. You don't need to work maximally to improve your maximal strength. So most people, right, I want to improve my 5K. So what do I go and do? I go and run the 5K 3 times a week, 4 times a week. And after 4 weeks, I would have hoped you'd improved your 5K time. But what happens is, you know, we get diminished returns. So, you know, it's like, you know, it's like a bank. You know, you're investing all this money into a bank, and the interest rate is just dropping and dropping and dropping. And actually, you're not getting anywhere. And what's going to happen? I'm going to stop doing the 5K run. So for me, is to know your goal and then to use variations of conditioning to improve that goal. So can you do a 7K a little bit slower? So we're really working on more of an aerobic capacity. Okay. So we, you know, don't forget from an energy system point that we can play each aspect out. Are we doing some speed work? So the biggest mistake that people make is then, right, Jack wants to improve his 5K time, but he doesn't actually say, I want to improve it to get under 20 minutes, for example, which is a decent pace. So can Jack go and run 5K in 20 minutes non-consecutively? So i.e., could you go out and do 5 1K efforts at 4 minutes? And then we can start to have a play around with lots of different intervals, and we can look at extensive intervals and intensive intervals. And they're the types of things that people need to be doing. And it's patience as well. I think that we could all sit here and we could think of like, you know, our best athletes or our best clients, and we could say, right, well, they're definitely consistent, they're definitely patient, and they definitely trust the coach of what we're doing. And I think they're if you think of your people that have achieved the most and done the most, they're the big three. And to bring it back is that, right, so for example, a Bronco test, which is, you know, one of the rugby's kind of go-to test, and it probably came out, I'd say maybe 4 years ago, and it's a 1.2K shuttle where you go out 20 meters back, 40 meters back, 60 meters back 5 times. And every rugby club pretty much in the world now does it, and pretty much every rugby club shares data. So it's great for you if you're trying to become a professional, is just saying, right, you know, like Bowden Barrett runs it in 4:12. Well, I need to try, and if I want to be as fit as him, I need to break it down into 4:12. And then you can break down, right, well, each shuttle needs to be, you know, 50 seconds, for example. And most people don't do that. And like, for example, I've got a guy and he keeps messaging me his 5K times, boom, boom, boom. And you can see, like, you know, coinciding with his loss in body fat, you know, and in lockdown, he's been pretty good with his nutrition. So his body fat's dropping off. So obviously, hey, look, you're going to improve your 5K time, but it's going to diminish. It's going to slow down. Then what can we do to adjust things? So there's some of the things that you can think about. So that's where it comes into this idea that maybe 2 running sessions a week or 3 running sessions a week, you can really improve your running, and it doesn't take you hours and hours and hours.
I'm sorry, just interrupt. I'm going to have to go. I got a client here.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll show you what I've been dealing with for the last hour as well. my adductors are on fire, trying to keep my legs closed and stop that dog slipping between them.
Nice.
But great chatting, Lee. Really
Nice.
interesting. Really enjoyed that. And if he's talk more, I'll catch up. But I'll see you all guys later.
Let them.
Cheers,
Pleasure.
Si.
Pleasure.
All right.
I think something, especially from general population point of view, that has come into people's trainings quite a lot recently is the classic with the sort of classes and doing HIIT and things like that, where they do 45 seconds exercise, 15 seconds off. And people use that as a way to improve their conditioning in a sense. And this go, go, go mentality of having to do more. Like you just said, you don't actually have to do that. So with the actual running sessions, what sort of metrics are you looking for people to hit or targets to hit during that session? Are you looking for anything with heart rate, or are you trying to keep it in a certain zone, or what sort of thing? Because especially I've noticed, like in gyms I've worked in, there's the heart rate monitors that come up on the screen, like my zone, and people are like in the, oh, I need to hit the red, I need to get in the red. Whereas for their conditioning, like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that might not necessarily be the right thing.
No, so, you know, it goes back to kind of external versus internal, you know, in terms of monitoring point of view, and, you know, what is actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
And heart rate is a great option because it's ready available. It's reasonably cheap to get a heart rate. I think that, you know, a decent polar is like, I don't know, 40, 50 pounds that links up to your phone. And it's a metric that you can get and you can monitor. So, you know, heart rate's a great one. So for example, aerobic capacity session, a longer based in session, you know, ideally 40 minutes plus.
Yeah.
Again, it plays down, but normally, you know, maximal heart rate minus around 40 to 50 beats is a good place to be, you know, so that can vary from anywhere from 130 up to the fitter guys of 150.
Yeah.
So a great way to do this is that you find a run that, you know, is 40 minutes or 50 minutes in duration. And you just say, right, I'm going to run this distance, or I'm going to run this time, and I'm going to try and keep it in this heart rate zone of maybe, for example, 140 to 150. And you go out there and you run basically for 40 minutes. And then what you try to do is that you do the same run again, keeping the same heart rate, but you try and do it a bit quicker, basically. So all you're doing is you're nudging up your capacity. And then the idea is then you stretch it out and you do 42 minutes. You know, I really like the in and out runs. I think they're great. So basically what you do is, you know, start off with 10 minutes. I'm going to run or jog 10 minutes. I'm going to rest 2 minutes, and I'm going to jog back in 10 minutes. And I'm going to keep my heart rate at the same. And then each week, you know, I might add in 30 seconds each side, and I build and build and build and build and build, basically. And that's a great way to improve your, you know, your aerobic capacity. Now, if you wanted to improve your aerobic power, you know, which is maximally running aerobically, so 4 or 5 minutes in duration, with a you know, a good kind of work to rest ratio of 2 to 1 or 1 to 1, etc. Then you know, so I'm going to run 4 minutes, I'm going to rest 2 minutes, basically. And you could push it on in terms of distance then, basically, right? So for the next 3 minutes, I'm going to run from A to B. I'm going to rest 2 minutes at B, and then I'm going to run from B to A. And then I continue that on, basically. And then what you might do is you might add in another rep each week, for example. You know, so it might start off at 4 reps, and then you go to 5 reps. Then you might go to 2 sets of 3 reps with a bit of a longer break in duration. They're the types of things.
100%. I think that's a great point that you've made, like, especially across this little mini discussion about conditioning, is that not many people, when they want to improve it and they go for their runs, actually have a goal with it, like you said right at the beginning. So before you go out on your runs, what, like, most people just go, oh, I'm going to go for a run. It's like, great. Well, that's like the same as saying, I'm going to go for a gym session. Like, you have no idea what you're actually going to do. So I think that sort of mentality between the gym and conditioning is lost a little bit, in the sense that you can set all these goals, but then if you don't have them for your running, you're just running for the sake of running. So I think that's a really important point to get across. And the same with like small progressions.
Yeah. And I think the biggest misconception is the difference between HIIT training and HIIT training.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Explain it.
So,
say someone doesn't know.
So high intensity training for me is making sure that your work effort is the maximal quality of work. Yeah. Whereas high intensity training is basically looking at an overall broad, you know, so if we went back to session RPE and you're looking at Jack's saying, right, well, that session is a 9 out of 10, right? I worked so hard for 20 minutes. And this is the biggest conception, is that actually those types of session, people aren't working maximally. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so for example, if I did 40 seconds on, 20 seconds off, 1 rep, 2 rep, you know, but after 3 or 4 reps, my quality of work, you know, my actual movement quality, the speed at which I'm moving is probably crap, basically. So, you know, a prime example is that how we look at, and you can use heart rate as well, but a good variation is, like, let's say, I don't know, we're going to do a 400 meter run or a 200 meter run, and Jack sets off, and his first attempt, he's hitting this time, and then you start to fall off basically. Well, what we would do then is we'd adjust your rest, we'd give you more rest, so we'd allow that the quality of work is superior, basically. And people need to understand there's a difference between high intensity training and high intensity interval training. Yeah. And that's, and I see it, you know, Instagram's horrendous. You know, people are like, look at this, blah, blah, blah. You know, I'm doing 20 seconds of work, I'm having 5 seconds off. I'm blah, 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 blah. And it's not, it's just a high intensity training, you know. And I think that the problem is that Tabatas, you know, 20 on, 10 off, I've used them, you know, players enjoy it because it's short and sharp, etc. But it's now, that was supposed to be, you know, 2 blocks of 8 reps. Now people are doing 20 minutes of it, 30 minutes of it. And you're like, by the end of that, you know, by 25 minutes in, you're just sloppy. You can, you know, so
you're getting tired for tired's sake, really, at that point, aren't you?
Yeah, you're just adding load upon load for no particular reason, you know, and it kind of comes a little bit back to the CrossFit, is that basically, you know, if you look at, you know, the end of the session, you know, that circuit, basically, like, you go in, and I've seen it, you know, I've been in CrossFit gyms, I've trained in them, and you're like, your movement quality, because it's complex. You're not asking them to do some workouts are simple, but I say simple, but they're easier movements, but power cleans and blah, blah. These are superior, these are complex movements that people spend years of their life perfecting, and it's a whole sport in itself to go in there and do them and
rep it out.
And you're like, and the problem is that, again, it's a great environment, people are around you, they're cheering you on, they're all screaming, and it gets so much more out of you. And then I'll get injured, basically. So I just wanted to make that kind of clear distinction between, I think people get that so mixed up,
because it creeps into people's schedules with even like the sort of movement patterns you're saying. It creeps into like general classes, not even specific CrossFit classes, where you end up going to any old gym and you've got things like dumbbell snatches and things like that, which like all that sort of stuff always creeps in. So if you were looking at this, obviously it's a broad question, because obviously it's always the answer is it depends. But say you've got Joe Bloggs who come to you and he's like, I want to get stronger and fitter, like, because I know you've done a lot of work on structuring individual sessions. So we'll work our way back. How would you structure a general week for someone to hit most of the boxes? So they hit their strength targets, they hit their conditioning targets. What would you structure a week like for someone?
Okay, so the only thing it would depend on is how many sessions per week, really.
Yeah.
And how long.
Say they can train. Say they come to you and say, I can train every day, but how would you structure my week for that?
Okay, so you build it in. So really, what you'd want some high central nervous system days, and then some lower days after. So if we're looking at strength, then ideally we'd want 3 or 4 sessions per week on a strength-based work, really. So if we're going to say 4, then ideally it'd be probably a lower upper split.
Sure. That'd
be the better way.
Yep.
And normally with that lower split is that would be your high intensity speed day as well, basically. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to put all that load into one day. And that's the biggest mistake that most people make, is they're like, right, well, for example, I've sprinted in the morning, or I've done some shuttle work in the morning that's fast. I don't want to do legs because I'll be tired. I'll do legs tomorrow. And what happens is that you basically just keep adding fatigue onto fatigue onto fatigue, as opposed to saying, hey, look, it's very easy for me to adjust my lower body day or my lower body session. And then the next day I can do upper body with maybe some more aerobic capacity based work. They're the type 2. So Monday, ideally, it would be, some kind of speedy work, some anaerobic based work, and then lower body lift. And then you do maybe some aerobic capacity stuff, upper body. Then Wednesday is more recovery day, basically, and then you might just repeat that cycle. That's how we do it. Now, obviously that's in the ideal scenario, but some people might only be able to get to the gym twice a week. Well, then really, if you're going to go twice a week, you'd probably look at 2 total body sessions. Sure. My personal preference is that I've now gone to more total body sessions, me personally. So what I'm trying to do is look at those movements. So really, if we look at squat, hinge, single leg, push, pull, a brace, a carry, over the course of the week, just to make sure that you get them in. And I try to get 5 to 8 work sets of those, basically. Yep. And that's how I might program it.
Is there any reason for going total body now? What's the reason behind that? Just the way you pull out, it's just easier for you to get in schedule wise, or?
I think it's more of kind of a frequency, so I think that, however you want to see it, and science is a great thing, basically, that you can talk, we could sit here and we could look at all the science, the number of sets that you really need to create that stimulus. Yeah. Most people think it's in the broad term of 5 to 10 ish. So what that allows you to do is maybe get 2 lots of 5 sets in, as opposed to 10 sets on one day.
Yeah.
So what you're trying to do is you're trying to push the stimulus across the week, basically. So that, for example, if we went to bodybuilding, old school bodybuilding, Dorian Yates style, or Mike Menz's, you wouldn't be able to walk for 5 days after their leg session, and you'd probably just get enough just get enough recovery in for the next week for the leg session, and it would be that continual progress. Don't get me wrong, work for those guys. Now we've kind of gone more into, let's not try and kill ourselves. Let's kind of get 5 sets, 5 good quality work sets in. Yep. And then maybe 3 days later, we still feel it, but we can still walk, and we'll do 5 sets again. And that's my biggest point, right? Especially with young people and young athletes, and young general population, is that you start off in the gym and you start to get some gains, you start to get stronger, you start to improve, you get hypertrophy, this is a piece of cake, basically, the newbie gains, basically. And then the problem is that you start to plateau, and most people think, well, I just need to do more. So you go from, say, for example, 20 work sets a session, now 22, 25, 30, and you're like, what are you doing? There's only so many sets that you can do unless you want to be in the gym for 2 hours. And the problem is that you haven't got that dose response right. So what I try to do is I encourage and I get surprisingly a lot of Instagram messages from young people saying, oh, how can I improve? What can I do? And I say, oh, well, what are you currently doing? And they're like, well, I'm training 6 days a week at the moment. And you're like, you're an idiot. I'm really sorry, and it's no.
It happens to us as well. People think more is better for their results. They're like especially from like general populace, for things like fat loss and weight loss. Instead of looking at something like their nutrition and sleep, they'll go, oh, I'll do an extra class that day. I'll do 3 classes in a row. I'll do another session. That's never the answer.
Yeah, and it's hey, look, when I say idiot, that depends on their schedule, So if you're a decent level athlete when you're a kid, you've probably got your school wanting to do stuff, county wanting to do stuff.
Yeah, of course.
National team. You might, when I was a hockey coach, like these kids were playing hockey pretty much every night of the week, maybe 2 games on a Sunday. And then you're sat there thinking, well, I know that from my background that they need to be doing some form of strength training to improve their performance, but they're just,
when are you going to do that?
Yeah, like, so for example, ice hockey, super interesting eye opener is that, under 20s, under 17s play 2 or 3 games per week, right? So how can you build your training in around that? Plus, on top of that, they're training Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday would be off, Thursday night, play Friday, train maybe a little bit on the ice on Saturday, play Sunday. Yeah. And so, and it's a sport that's built around volume, because the seniors, the more games you play, the more money that the more ticket revenue, and that's how it's funded, the sport, and also it's indoors. So, Geneva was like 9,000 people watching, whereas obviously, well, that's probably what Old Trafford looks like on a game.
So, deep, man.
So that's how they do it. And the problem is that people think, to get used to that volume of games, I need to give them loads of games when they're younger. And I used to work with one guy, I know a guy who worked in China for the badminton. He did all the conditioning for badminton, and every morning they'd run a 10K. Every morning, run a 10K. And you're like, I understand the premises of developing aerobic capacity for high intensity recovery, but 10K every day, you're just like,
Lee, tell me, going back to the the splits. Doing a muscle group multiple times in a week. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's a really easy way of creating overload as well over a sustained period, because if you talked about the 5 sets, 5 to 10 sets. So let's say someone does 10 sets on legs, on quads, let's say over 3 sessions in a week. It becomes very easy to add a set over 3 days. Whereas if you're trying to do those 12 sets in one session, all of a sudden adding 2-3 sets makes the session even more brutal than it was before.
And think of the quality that you're going to go through. If you're doing 12 sets, now the quality is just, so if you think of, now, if we think of hypertrophy, and it's an area where basically let's think most people go to the gym because they want to get bigger. It's simple.
Muscle, yeah.
It's muscle. So we look at the 3 hypertrophic stimuluses. So if I can remember, so, tension, muscular damage, and metabolic stress. Basically, they're the big 3 pretty much. And most people point to tension as being the number one thing. So, and tension comes from load, but also creating load in that movement. And what I see in the gym is I see people doing so many garbage sets and rubbish sets. And basically you look at it and you're like, right, yeah, you've done 30 sets, but actually how many of them were you really concentrating on? How many of them were you really trying to recruit that muscle group, that muscle, etc. So we're bouncing, we're swinging, we're with our mates. We're trying to do as much load as possible because that's the way we think of doing it. We've got no tempo. We've got no control. We haven't really structured it. So what I'm saying there is that I see too younger people do too many what we would call specific hypertrophy methods in a session. So I'd see a set guy and he'd be doing drop sets, force reps, mechanical sets and drop reps all in one session. And you're like, what are you doing? Because they believe that metabolic stress, the pump, is the one that's going to do it. And if we look at like I put a post on my Instagram of the South African rugby team and they're all ripped. Now, most people would give their right arm, to look like that. And that is a product of training through the whole rep range, all of the rep ranges, all of the hypertrophy stimuluses, plus on top of it, being elite professionals and having great nutrition. And they're the kind of things that I see from myself training that probably, as I was young, we were all doing it. We were all, I went double sessions. So I'd do strength so when we get an injured player, especially a lower body injury or something like that, a great thing to do is to do some strength in the morning. Poliquin used to be a big proponent of this, strength in the morning, and then more kind of reps in the afternoon. So for example, George, same muscle group. For example, we'd do like bench. So for example, you'd rock up in the morning and we'd do 10 sets of 3 reps bench press. And that's all we would do. We'd warm up properly, but that's pretty much all we would do in the morning. Then you might have 3-4 hours off, come back in the afternoon, and we'd stay same muscle group or a horizontal push, but we'd do dumbbell press, incline press, flies, and we'd just go through more kind of working from 8 reps up to 20, 25 reps. I saw so much from an improvement in both strength and size, basically. So
you've covered everything there, really. So could you just quickly, briefly, the 3 pillars of hypertrophy, because obviously, just for the people who are watching who don't know what they all mean. So you mentioned tension, which is obviously creating tension in the muscle and holding it there for a sustained period.
So if I just build on that, one of the best analogies I've heard of it, if you think, and Ben Pakowski talks about this a lot, a muscle is an elastic band pretty much, basically. So if you want, it's really hard to create tension in an elastic band if both ends of the band are moving, basically. Yeah. So one thing that we really need to do is, if we're going to try and create as much tension as possible, is we need to anchor, one of the points. Normally the origin is the one to anchor, basically. And then it's easier to stretch that elastic band or stretch that muscle or create as much tension as possible. So that's tension. The next one is damage, basically. So we know that obviously if we cause damage in a muscle, then our body is like, hey, we need to get that muscle stronger. So lots of, anabolic responses or muscle synthesis will go into that muscle to make it better. And that's one part of it. Now, that means that you don't need to be really sore to mean that you haven't created that anaerobic responses. It's one of the things that you need to do. And the last one is metabolic damage. So we know that if we create a lactate environment, so less oxygen going to the muscles, that real kind of pain feeling, the pump, basically, that causes, again, it signals more growth hormone to be released, etc., etc. Now, one way that you could do that is you could split it into 3 sessions. So, for example, on Monday, you do a total body session, strength-based, basically. So anywhere under 6 reps, good 6 to 8 reps, good form, etc. Then,
so which box does that tick? That will tick the
tension
box.
Yeah. Then you might say, right, well, then the Wednesday is going to be more of a a muscular damage session. So you might look at more time under tension work, more focusing on eccentric contractions, so lengthening. Okay, because if we think about our muscle fibers, they act like a boat, like you're rowing a boat. So that's like rowing a boat. So as soon as they link, the eccentric is the rip. So that's the thing that causes that pain to kind of damage. And then Friday, perfect for going out, is a metabolic pump session, basically, where 12, 15 plus upwards, and you're really trying to get as much blood in. You're trying to get the muscle to swell so that it's like stretching a balloon. If you think about it, when you stretch a balloon, so you blow it up, you let it out. Well, the second time round you do it, it's easier to expand that balloon. So that's where the muscle comes from. The more it creates that response, basically. And they're the big 3. So I'm not a great fan of that, because on a strength day, I think you're going to get deterioration through the session. So really, if I go back to Jack when he's saying structuring, if I was going to look at upper body, upper lower split, what I'd look at is working through those in order. So tension normally comes at the start of the
demanding neurologically.
Most demanding neurologically. It's the one that basically is most demanding mentally as well. And then you'd work through. So prime example is like, I don't know, 5x5 of something, then you go down, then you'd look at maybe 4 sets at 8 to 12, and then maybe 3 sets at 15 plus. And that's a nice little way to do it.
And you can mess with those numbers, I guess, the sets wise and stuff, based on where you are and how you're feeling and everything like that, which you talked about earlier. I think that's a really good for everyone who's listening to hear about, who wants to gain muscle, about that, because that's basically covered all you need within a session within a working week, let's say, or a session to successfully build muscle. And I think that if that's a really good point to take home for anyone who's watching. Get those 3 pillars, and you're gonna start building muscle. Yeah, that was great, Lee. Thanks.
The way you structure it as well is way better than, like you say, with the body part split, where you smash your chest in on one day, and then all your legs, and then you can't move because if you link it all back to performance, everyone wants to feel better. Like from athletes to general population, athletes want to perform better on the field. We have people that want to perform better at work in their daily lives. If they smash their legs in on a Tuesday and they can't walk or play with their kids for the next 3 or 4 days, what's the point? So linking it back to that way, just structuring your training so you actually perform better, which as a whole is massively important.
Yeah, and it comes from being in an athletic environment whereby I can't kill Jack. I can't not enable him to run the next day because he can't train. He can't do his technical tactical session, his sports session, basically, because he can't walk.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do in season is keep that stimulus. We still can improve your strength, improve your power, get you, hypertrophy. We can do. It's obviously a lot tougher because we need to be in a calorie surplus, and so it's a real tough one. So if you think about it, going back to hypertrophy, is that what we would do is we'd pick individual players that needed to do hypertrophy or improve their body, increase their body comp, for example, and we'd have to bring them out of certain sessions. So that, for example, we might do a mixed session where we do conditioning, so running based conditioning, with also conditioning games. So, we play small sided games. What we would do is that if Jack's trying to put on muscle, he wouldn't do the running based conditioning sessions, because it's just another energy expenditure that we've turned around to Jack, the player, and agreed and said, look, if we're going to pull you out of these conditioning things, then it basically takes away your excuse to say, oh, I can't put on muscle because I'm burning too many calories, da, da, da. But we'd still want you to play the games because, that's developing game-based conditioning, but it's also improving agility. It's also improving decision-making, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that people need to think about, So if you're trying to put on muscle, then you need to realize that basically when you're training, you might need to adapt something. You might need to take a chunk out, basically, so that, for example, if you are doing running on top of that, then you need to prioritize which is the most important.
Something's got to give, basically. Yeah. Something's got to give.
Unless you're in a situation where you can keep eating enough or having your nutrition on point to keep fueling for performance, basically, or fueling for that growth. Because that's how it goes. If you think about it, training is the architect. It's telling your body, right, this is what you're going to do. Yeah. And then your nutrition is the building supplier that brings the load of bricks involved. And then that's how you build it, basically. So lots of people are architects, they love it. They train hard. I'm training hard, but I'm not putting on weight. Well, probably the main reason is because your nutrition sucks, or your nutrition is poor and it's not consistent enough, basically. And that's the big thing, is that anyone can have a good diet for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but hey, we know that hypertrophy is from when you first start off, it's 16 to 20 sessions before you start to see some actual size gains and not neurological gains. And then you need to continue doing that, basically. And the key is that you just want enough. You just want enough, basically. You don't want too much because you're going to lay down fat. Yeah. If you don't have enough, you're not going to be able to build what you need to build.
I'm gonna stop you there because I think we're gonna wrap this up now, just because I've got a meeting in 5 minutes. But what I don't want to do is go into that, because I think we should do a part 2 for this.
I think we should, yeah, definitely.
Way more stuff on nutrition, and then also we didn't get a chance to go into it. Simon had a question about nutrition, so how you would structure fat loss for athletes, and then also
cool, no problem,
into the structure of a session, because I know you've done some good posts on how to generally structure a whole session from start to beginning. But just before we leave, Lee, where can people find you? Where can people read more about your stuff and all the content you're putting out?
So Instagram is the Athlete Tribe, and they can go on to www.theathletetribe.com. Tis for kind of obviously inviting me. I've been hassling Jack, a little bit. He's probably too busy training, or trying to grow a beard. But yeah, guys, more than happy to come on and speak more about it.
Yeah, man, I'm going back on for those.
Perhaps next week if we're all willing. But
perfect.
We'll get it organised. Just quickly, just want to tell you guys about the classes that we're running. So we've got 2 20-minute classes on kettlebells, Mondays and Thursdays. We've got a core class, a banded core class on Friday, a banded full workout on Tuesdays. which has happened today. It's all on YouTube. And then on Wednesday this week, the stability workout is working on knee stability. We should be on phase 4. It's phase 3. No, phase 4. Anyone who hasn't done it, please start that one from the beginning. Okay, you're not going to be able to do phase 4 at phase 4. Start from the beginning, build your way up. And don't forget about Simon's 3 core-based workouts: Monday, Wednesday, Friday, live on Instagram, 12:30. That's me. All right, Lee, thank you.
No worries, you're welcome.
Thanks for your time.
Have a good day, guys.
See you later.
Cheerio.